What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for Sports, right? So you still have people out there who refuse to give Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks any credit on their hard-earned NBA championship. The media, the sports media, mainstream, they give them no respect, man, none whatsoever, none. And they're basically putting an asterisk by this championship because of the fact that their favorite player and their favorite team didn't get to the championship, didn't get to the promised land because of injuries. Okay? But I'm here to show you, with the help of a subscriber of mine, actually, because of the efforts of a subscriber of mine, he did all the work. Yosef, all right? He's a subscriber of mine, and he wrote a very interesting piece that I was so astounded and blown away by that I asked his permission if I could use it for a YouTube video. So don't credit me for this one. Credit Yosef. All right, Yosef Ali. He did the research that I'm going to literally regurgitate in this video. But it was such an amazing piece that I asked him if I could do a video, reading what he wrote. He said, yeah. So, so credit to him. All right. So during these playoffs, and especially in the bubble last season, it seemed like anything anyone talked about was asterisks, and if this season deserved one due to the plethora of injuries. So Joseph decided to see if he could technically give an asterisk to literally every NBA champion from 1947 all the way to 2021, just to show how fucking stupid this argument truly is. The 1947 Philadelphia Warriors, in one of the biggest choke jobs in the history of the NBA, even considering this era. The Chicago Stags, their opponent, shot 26 of 129 in game one of a best of three final series, practically gift wrapping the win for the Warriors. The 1948 champion Baltimore Bullets forfeited a championship game in 1947 in the ABL and had to jump to the BAA to be allowed to play. The world champion 1949 Minneapolis Lakers. The owner of the team rage quit the NBL and joined the BAA so they could win another championship. The 1950 Minneapolis World Lakers. The NBA officially becomes the NBA with the merger between the BAA and the NBL. Now, this was a very fucked up schedule to help merge the leagues into one, which led to some teams playing a very weak schedule, while others had to play extremely hard ones. The merger year worse than any lockout year. The 1951 world champion Rochester Royals. A whopping 7 teams left the NBA before and during the season, taking the number of teams from 17 down to 10. The Anderson Packers, the Sheboygan Redskins, and Waterloo Hawks jumped to another league, which eventually folded, while the Chicago Stags, Denver Nuggets, not the Denver Nugget team that we all know, but the earlier version of that team, the St. Louis Bombers, and Washington Capitals folded. An easy cakewalk if almost half the league leaves. 1952 world champion Minneapolis Lakers. Lack of home court advantage. Neither team played at their home arena until Game 7, when the Lakers were able to play at their normal home arena. The Lakers had to play in an auditorium, and the Knicks had to play in an armory because the circus kicked them out of Madison Square Garden. So the Knicks never had the benefit of playing at home. I think that deserves an asterisk, right? The 1953 world champion Minneapolis Lakers. By now, they were a dynasty. But the NBA was advancing from its early prehistoric caveman days, and there was an early version of pre-analytics starting to pop up, and that was playing the numbers, the free throws in this era, so to speak. So instead of trying to score the basketball, the strategy was to put people on the foul line who were not good free throw shooters. This led to a lot of fouls, a lot of free throws. There were an average of 58 fouls a game and an average of 73 free throws taken per game in the finals. In game two, after the Knicks took a 1-point lead early in the third quarter, neither team would even take a shot from the field the rest of the game, instead fouling every single possession and turning it into a game of free throws. You have people that criticize the hacker Shaqs and the hacker DeAndre Jordan and the hacker Drummond and all that, but you had an extreme version of that. So did you put an asterisk on that championship? The 1954 world champion Minneapolis Lakers, the final championship of this aging dynasty. Home cooking. The finals were played in 7 games over the course of 13 days. After losing the free throw battle all series, the Lakers magically got 44 free throws in Game 7. The 1955 world champion Syracuse Nationals. The franchise would eventually become the Philadelphia 76ers. Mob corruption. Multiple accusations, including teammates on the Fort Wayne Pistons, that some players on the Pistons threw the finals in a conspiracy with gamblers. In Game 7, with 12 seconds left in the game, Fort Wayne player Frankie Bryan fouled Syracuse, giving them free throws to take a 1-point lead. Then, starting guard Andy Phillip for Fort Wayne turned the ball over with 3 seconds left to allow Syracuse to steal Game 7 and win the finals. Fort Wayne teammate George Yardley, who became the first player to score 2,000 points in a season in the NBA, then went on to record after the game saying he believes that Phillip threw the game on purpose and that multiple Fort Wayne teammates were in on it, hinting at Frankie Bryan. Asterisk, the 1956 Philadelphia Warriors. Their opponent, the Fort Wayne Pistons, had multiple injury problems throughout the year and into the playoffs. Sounds very familiar. The 1957 world champion Boston Celtics. St. Louis Hawks star Cliff Hagan fouled out in the fourth quarter of Game 7 and was forced to miss double overtime, where the Celtics would eventually win by 2. The world champion 1958 St. Louis Hawks. Boston Celtics superstar Bill Russell severely sprained his ankle in Game 3 of the series versus the Hawks. Bill Russell would miss Games 4 and 5, while the Hawks took advantage and seized a 3-2 series lead going into Game 6. Bill Russell did return in Game 6, but was only a shell of himself because of the injury. But despite this, Boston still nearly won the game. It took a 50-point, 19-rebound performance by Bob Pettit to close out Bill Russell and the Celtics 110-109. This 50-point performance is tied with Giannis Antetokounmpo for the most points in a closeout game in NBA Finals history. Also, it should be stated that the St. Louis Hawks team is the last NBA championship team without a black player on their roster. The world champion 1959 Boston Celtics. A 52-win Celtics team faced a Minneapolis Lakers team in the finals that won only 33 games. Yikes. The Hawks had absolutely horrendous shooting from stars Cliff Hagan and Bob Pettit in the majority of the games in those NBA finals. The 1961 world champion Boston Celtics. St. Louis Hawks superstar Bob Pettit underplayed the first 2 games of the series and let the Celtics get an early 2-0 lead before finally getting back to normal and leading the Hawks to win Game 3 of that series. The world champion 1962 Boston Celtics. Celtics guard Frank Ramsey, after having shot a total of 13 free throw attempts the first 6 games of the series, had 16 free throw attempts in Game 7 and an eventual 3-point win for the Boston Celtics, not to mention the fact that the Lakers were very porous at the center position, and Bill Russell, of course, took advantage of that in this series. World champion 1963 Boston Celtics. Lakers superstar guard Jerry West struggled with injuries all season and wasn't 100% healthy for the playoffs. Plus, I'm going to mention this every time, the Lakers were very porous at the center position, which Bill Russell took full advantage of in this final series yet again. The world champion 1964 Boston Celtics. St. Louis Hawks starting center Zelmo Beaty dealt with nagging injuries all series. The Western Conference Finals between the Hawks and the San Francisco Warriors, which led to Wilt Chamberlain having free reign to score and eventually led the San Francisco Warriors to winning the Western Conference Finals in 7 games. No injury to Beaty means they probably beat the Warriors and Wilt, and they would have had the depth that the Warriors didn't roster-wise to seriously contest with the Celtics. I can just imagine a barbershop back then, 1964. I'm telling you, man, if my man Zelmo didn't get hurt, the Hawks would have beaten the Warriors, man. Oh, man, we're unstoppable, man. You know Zelmo's that cat blood. Come on, man. And Zelmo and them would have beat all them honkies in Beantown, man. Come on. Beat up all them Bill Russell and them cats, man. But you out your mind, man. What you doing rooting for St. Louis anyway? You talking about crackers, blood. Ain't nothing but racist in St. Louis, man. Boston ain't no better. True that. I mean, they had them conversations back then. You think this is just starting about how a team had an advantage over this team because of an injury? The world champion 1965 Boston Celtics. Lakers superstar Elgin Baylor injured his knee 5 minutes into the first game of the playoffs. The Lakers would still make the finals before ultimately losing 4-1. And yes, this has to be mentioned. Yes, once again, Bill Russell took advantage of the porous center position the Lakers had. And that was another advantage that they had every time they went against the Lakers before they acquired Wilt Chamberlain. The 1966 world champion Boston Celtics. They got a lot of help from Wilt Chamberlain in the Eastern Conference Finals because Wilt went a woeful 28 of 68 from the foul line in the Eastern Conference Finals. However, the Celtics themselves nearly blew a 3-1 series lead in the finals versus the Lakers, despite the fact, as I have said time and time again, the Lakers were extraordinarily woeful at the center position, which Bill Russell took exceeding advantage of. The 1967 world champion Philadelphia 76ers. Now, they were one of the greatest teams of all times, but even they had some help, okay? Horribly weak Western Conference, which meant that whoever came out of the East would almost certainly win the championship. First year that the Celtics had Bill Russell as a player coach. They also benefited from playing a brand new first year Chicago Bulls team in the first round, while other teams had to play legit teams. This team went 68-13 during the regular season, which was a byproduct of a watered down NBA for that particular year. The 1968 world champion Boston Celtics. The St. Louis Hawks lost Lou Hudson for 35 games due to military service. which hampered the Hawks, who would have almost definitely been the number one team in the league record wise. He missed the last 35 games of the season, and his first game back was the first round of playoffs, where the Hawks would eventually lose. The 1969 world champion Boston Celtics. Turmoil was at a constant influx with the Los Angeles Lakers that particular season, with Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlain, and Elgin Baylor clashing at the beginning of the season, and Wilt and coach Butch Van Brederkoff clashing all throughout the season and playoffs. Jerry West struggled with exhaustion from Game 3 onwards and wasn't the same player after scoring 53 and 41 points in Games 1 and Games 2 of the NBA Finals. In Game 4, Elgin Baylor was controversially ruled out of bounds with 7 seconds left and the Celtics down 1. In Game 5, Jerry West pulled his hamstring in the closing minutes of the game and was out hobbled for the rest of the series. And then, of course, there was the controversy of Game 7 when Wilt Chamberlain went out of the game with, I can't remember exactly how much time it was. This is something that wasn't in his notes, but this is what I remember. Wilt Chamberlain came out of the game with 7 minutes to go, I think, and Butch Van Brederkoff would not let him back in the game, much to the dismay of Wilt Chamberlain, much to the dismay of Lakers fans, and ultimately the Celtics lost that game. This is an excerpt about that Game 7. In anticipation of a Lakers win, Lakers owner Jack Kent Cooke had ordered thousands of balloons with world champion Lakers printed on them, suspended from the rafters to perform. Flyers were placed in every seat stating, "When, not if, the Lakers win the title." Balloons will be released from the rafters. The USC marching band will play Happy Days Are Here Again, and broadcaster Chick Hearn will interview Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, and Wilt Chamberlain in that particular order. Before the game, the Celtics circulated in their locker room a memo about the Lakers' championship celebration plans. When Jerry West went to the court for a pregame shoot-around and saw the balloons, he became furious with Cooke. Russell noted the giant net hanging from the ceiling during pregame warm-ups and said to West, "Those fucking balloons are staying up there." With only two true guards on the Lakers roster, and West still feeling the effects of the hamstring pull, Celtics player coach Russell ordered his team the fast break at every opportunity. It also has to be stated that throughout the Celtics dynasty, this is the age before free agency, they consistently had the best overall talent in the NBA by far. I mean, it was just a given. Every year they were going to be the favorites. And I'm not one to take away from the greatness of Bill Russell or their dynasty, but it was a fact that they had generally the best record in the NBA. The only time that the playing field started becoming level was when his team in the last two championships and they began to age. Now, those two titles, especially the 69 one, I rank high on Bill Russell because this team, the 1969 Celtics, is the second lowest seed ever to win a title. They were only the fourth seed. So it wasn't just that Bill Russell benefited off of playing with Hall of Fame players. He did, but Bill Russell was a great player, and that gets lost sometimes in translation. Now, was he as great as individually as Wilt or Larry Bird or all those guys? I'm not sure about that, but he was a great player, and he definitely belongs, in my opinion, at least in the top 15 all-time players list. Some people won't agree with that, but it is what it is. The 1970 world champion New York Knicks. With 3 seconds left and down two, Jerry West hit a Hail Mary shot beyond half court, but it only counted as 2 points since the three-pointers did not yet exist in the NBA. It did exist in the ABA. The Lakers would lose that game in overtime before losing the series 4 games to 3. You have to wonder if the three-point shot was in existence and Jerry West won the game in such a dramatic fashion, if that could have catapulted the Lakers to ultimately a series victory. You never know. The 1971 world champion Milwaukee Bucks, one of the great teams in NBA history, going 66-16 in the regular season and ultimately sweeping the Baltimore Bullets in the NBA Finals. But this has to be stated, though, that All-Star Bullets forward Gus Johnson, Honeycomb, was injured and only played in 2 games in the finals, and the Bullets were forced to start their series only 48 hours after they won Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals over the New York Knicks. So injury and fatigue did play a factor. I'm not saying they would have won the series, but that did play a factor in their dismal performance against the Milwaukee Bucks. The 1972 world champion Los Angeles Lakers, one of the great teams of all times. For over 2 decades, they had the wins record of 69 wins, 13 losses. They still have an unrivaled record of 33 games in a row winning. Won the championship in the finals against the Knicks, but the Knicks did have some issues, okay? First of all, Willis Reed was out with a knee injury before the series began. Knicks big man Dave DeBusschere was forced into limited minutes due to an injury while guarding Wilt, which led to really no one left on the Knicks being able to contend for rebounds. And guard Earl Monroe was playing injured for the Knicks as well. A fun fact, though, Wilt broke his wrist in Game 4 and still played Game 5, posting a ridiculous stat line of 24 points, 29 rebounds, 8 assists, and 8 blocks. The 1973 world champion New York Knicks. Now, of course, in the finals, they beat the aging Lakers for their second NBA title. But where the controversy arises is in the Eastern Conference Finals. They played against a Boston Celtic team which went 68-14 the regular season. They had Coach of the Year in Tom Heinsohn, the MVP in Dave Cowens. But ultimately, the Knicks were able to beat the Celtics in 7 games, with Celtics star John Havlicek missing Game 7 and being limited in his efficiency in other games due to a serious elbow injury. The 1974 world champion Boston Celtics. Their finals opponent, Milwaukee Bucks, their starting guard Lucius Allen was injured right before the series began, and shooting guard John McLaughlin was hobbled dealing with an ankle injury during the entire series. The 1975 world champion Golden State Warriors. Now, the Warriors, this team was pretty much remembered for their epic sweep of the 60-win Washington Bullets, who were heavily favored to win that series. But what gets lost, in history is the fact that if it weren't for certain circumstances, neither team probably would have even went to the finals. The Celtics were screwed by the refs in the Eastern Conference Finals with a 40 free throw differential between them and the Bullets. Bulls coach Dick Motta, remember back then the Bulls were in the Western Conference. Bulls coach Dick Motta refused to start Nate Thurmond against the Warriors in their Western Conference series, even though he was clearly the better player than starting center Tom Burwinkle, and he would lose the series 4-3 because of this decision. The 1976 world champion Boston Celtics. This is a great series between them and the neophyte Phoenix Suns, ultimately ending in a great Game 6. I think the game went to triple overtime. However, one of the key criticisms about this series was the officiating. In particular, incompetence, blown calls, and some people felt the officiating was slanted in the Celtics' favor. In particular, Game 5 of that series. The 1977 world champion Portland Trailblazers. This was the ABA merger season, which meant new teams to beat up on and a talent influx across the league. The 1978 world champion Washington Bullets. And ultimately, they had a thrilling 7-game series against the Sonics in which they prevailed. But it stands to be mentioned that the Portland Trailblazers were cheated out of what could have been a dynasty. MVP Bill Walton was injured at the end of the regular season, which took the best team in the league out of legit contention, even though they were still able to get to the Western Conference Finals. Bill Walton never again suited up for the Portland Trailblazers. The 1979 world champion Seattle Supersonics. Well, they did beat up on a Washington Bullets team that lost both their starting guards due to injuries. The 1980 world champion Los Angeles Lakers. The Phoenix Suns that year that had Hall of Fame coach Cotton Fitzsimmons at the helm and former Finals MVP and perennial All-Star Dennis Johnson in his prime were at a handicap in their playoff series against the Lakers because they were without Truck Robinson, who was a rebounding machine who led the NBA in rebounding a couple of years prior with the Utah Jazz. With Truck Robinson, they may have been able to dethrone the Lakers before Showtime got cooking. The 1981 world champion Boston Celtics. Well, in the finals, they played against the Houston Rockets, a Rockets team that did upset the Los Angeles Lakers, but albeit the same, a Rockets team that outside of Moses Malone did not have that much firepower. In fact, they only went 40 and 42 during the regular season. 40 and 42. As a matter of fact, in the Western Conference Finals, they went against another team that had a losing record, the 40 and 42 Kansas City Kings. That made it the only conference finals in NBA history where both teams had a losing record. To add insult to injury for the Rockets, aging star Rudy Tomjanovich, the future coach for the team, was dealing with an injury and only played 20 minutes the entire series. Asterisk, maybe. The 1982 world champion Los Angeles Lakers. Now, in the finals, Boston defeated the Philadelphia 76ers. But what should be noted is that when the Celtics were playing the Sixers in the Eastern Conference Finals, an injury to Tiny Archibald left Boston at disadvantage in the point guard position and led to the Sixers ultimately winning that series in 7 games. It stands to reason that if Tiny Archibald did not get injured, that Boston probably would have won that series. Boston were the defending champions. They stood a good chance at beating the Lakers. Not saying they would have, but they definitely could have. And Boston may have an additional title. Bird may have 4 instead of 3. Magic would have 4 instead of 5, and we're looking at things differently. Also, this is the first year with the new breakaway rims that were introduced across the NBA. The 1983 world champion Philadelphia 76ers dominated the NBA this particular season, going 65 and 17 and only losing 1 playoff game en route to one of the most dominant campaigns we've ever seen. Great team, but once again, there's something that you can nitpick. They were a super team. They were already a championship level team. They acquired reigning MVP Moses Malone. All right. Moses Malone was at that time arguably the best player in the NBA, definitely the most dominant player in the NBA at that time. And they also benefited from Dave Cowens having an injury with the Milwaukee Bucks. By that time, he was playing with the Milwaukee Bucks. So that's something that's open to discussion as well. They were a super team. They most definitely were. The 1984 world champion Boston Celtics. Now, this was the first year with expanded playoffs, meaning that before that particular year, for a number of years, there were three rounds. There was a first round, opening round. There was a conference finals round and an NBA finals round. From that year forward, there will be an opening round, a semi-final round, a conference finals, and a finals. The only difference is back then the first round, I believe, was best of three. I think. I think it was no, it was best of. It was either best of three or best of five. I can't remember. Might have still been best of three, but there was expanded playoffs, and Boston lucked out in that series in so many ways. Even Larry Bird himself said that the Celtics should have been swept in that finals. But they lucked out on one of the worst turnovers in NBA history to tie the game, and then they won game two after losing game one. We all know how Magic Johnson just had a uncharacteristically terrible series as far as decision making, clutch performance, and shooting the basketball. Ultimately, Boston, after the Lakers collapse, won the series in seven, but this is one of those series where clearly the better team did not win that series. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? A series where clearly the better team did not, or at least the team perceived to be the best team, did not win the series. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? The 1985 world champion Los Angeles Lakers. Now, their actual championship you can't really question. But what you do have to note is the parallels between that season and this season as far as the sheer amount of injuries that we saw in the NBA during the 84-85 season. Um, in an interview in April of 85, Red Auerbach, who had been with the NBA for some 40 years at that time, said that he had never seen such a rash of injuries throughout the league that he had that season. And like this year, there were notable players who had been hurt. Um, Bill Cartwright, Marvin Webster, Bernard King, notably, Truck Robinson, Pat Cummings, Daryl Dawkins, Albert King, Bernard's brother, Buck Williams, Otis Birdsong, Michael Ray Richardson, Cliff Levingston, Antoine Carr, Dan Roundfeld, Kelly Tripucka, Marquise Johnson is another one. Bill Walton, obviously, every damn year. Uh, the first Cliff Robinson, not the one that recently passed away. Frank Johnson, who you guys will probably remember as a backup for the Phoenix Suns in the early 90s. Clement Johnson, Andrew Toney, which was beginning to end for him. Larry Nance, Jack Sikma. As a matter of fact, half of the teams in the NBA that year, nearly half of the teams, had significant injuries on their roster. So you do wonder if there weren't so many teams that were injured, so many notable players, how did that affect the future of some of these franchises? And is it possible some of these teams, the Lakers or Boston, who made it to the finals, could they have been challenged or dethroned by one of these other teams if they didn't have so many of their key components hurt? So these are some things that were discussions then. The 1986 world champion Boston Celtics, one of the great championship teams of all times, the greatest Celtic team of all time. They went 67-15, the second best record in franchise history. They went 40-1 at home, only losing one home game to Portland. It's the best home record in NBA history. can't say anything about. I mean, there's no asterisk to this team. I mean, can you say anything, Mike? Well, throughout the league, the backboard was lowered 6 inches from what it was before to its present state. I mention this because, well, this has to have some type of effect on shooting and players' depth perception and being able to adjust to that. So that's something that's notable. In a continuation from the year prior, injuries still plague the NBA. Michael Jordan notably missed 64 games due to the broken foot. Um, and also drug suspensions. This was at the peak of that issue with drugs in the NBA, the mid 1980s. Um, I guess the biggest critique you could have for Boston is their opponent in the finals. Now, most people anticipated a rematch of the '85 finals, Lakers versus Celtics, but the Lakers were upsetted by the Houston Rockets in the playoffs. And the Houston Rockets played admirably, but they lost in 6 games to the Boston Celtics. But Houston could have won that series. They could have won that series. Olajuwon just demolished the front line of the Boston Celtics in a great series. Ralph Sampson did not play well at all in a poor series. Um, Robert Reed did not play particularly well, I believe. And nobody really played that well, that good outside of Olajuwon. And the Rockets were also without John Lucas due to suspension. So it stands to reason if they had John Lucas and if anybody else had stepped up and played reasonably well, they may have been able to beat that Boston Celtic team. So that's something to look at with that particular year, that particular team. Had they played the Lakers, maybe the Lakers could have beaten them. I don't know. You don't know, but that's just something that people always point out. They played the Rockets, they didn't play the Lakers. The 1987 world champion Los Angeles Lakers, the peak of Showtime. Michael, there's nothing that you could say to sully this championship. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. The 1986 Boston Celtics, right off the heels of a 16th title, had acquired Reggie Lewis and more prominently had the first overall pick, Len Bias, the guy that many people still compare to Michael Jordan, say he was better than Jordan in college. Just 2 days after he was drafted, Len Bias, of course, died of an acute cocaine-induced heart attack. And that forever altered the history, the future, I should say, of the Boston Celtics franchise. But even with that, there were other things going on. Bill Walton, who had resurrected his career the year prior, Sixth Man of the Year winner, injured himself again and ultimately retired by 1988. Kevin McHale, who's having the best season of his career, 86 87, playing the best basketball of his career by the spring of 87, suffered a stress fracture in his foot. And instead of shutting it down and having surgery, he decided to play through it, even though he risked ending his career as far as having a serious injury with his foot. And the separation grew bigger and bigger, but he played through it because he wanted to win a championship that badly. Ultimately, they were not successful, but Kevin McHale was never the same player after that season. And there were also other injuries that Boston was dealing with. Ultimately, Boston lost the finals in 6 games to the Lakers. But you wonder, had this been the Celtic team of the year before, if they could have beaten Showtime. And, it's a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas with this shit, man. If the Celtics weren't injured that year, that'd been the fourth title. But then again, like I said before, there was a situation earlier on. I think it was what year was it? 82. Well, if it wasn't for an injury to Nate Archibald, which helped Philly. Maybe Boston goes to the finals and beat them. Maybe Bird now has 5 titles and Magic with 3. So it's sort of a luck of the draw, man. Luck plays a big role in these things, and sometimes, unfortunately, bad luck plays a luck in these things, a factor in these things too. The 1988 World Champion Los Angeles Lakers. Well, what can you say about this? The Pistons blew a 3-2 lead, namely because of biased officiating. The refs were biased as hell in Game 7 of that series. A ghost foul for Kareem, called on Bill Laimbeer, cost the Pistons a championship. Not to mention, unfortunately, in Game 6, Isaiah Thomas severely injuring his ankle, which ultimately, despite a heroic 43-point performance, ultimately led to them losing Game 6 and blowing a 3-2 series. The 1989 world champion Detroit Pistons. I mean, just a dominant team that year. They started off the season with a pretty good record of 26-15 at the halfway mark, but they just destroyed the competition the second half of that season, going 37-4 the rest of the way, finishing with 63 wins. Just a dominant team, and swept the Lakers in the playoffs. Just great, great team. The bad boys had arrived. Is there anything you could say to critique this team or put an asterisk by it? Well, yeah, the Lakers and injuries. The Lakers were, I think they went 57-25 that year during the regular season, but the Lakers were very, very dominant in the playoffs. And this version of the Lakers were a little bit older, but they were relying much more on Magic and James Worthy and Byron Scott and the younger core. Kareem was in his last year. He was a shell of himself. But this was a really, really good Lakers team. As a matter of fact, going into the finals, they were 11-0. Unfortunately, just going through the process of year after year of going to the finals, the wear and tear took its toll. And Byron Scott went down with an injury. And then 5 minutes into game 3 of the NBA Finals, Magic Johnson goes down with a serious injury. I think it was a hamstring injury. He was out for the rest of the series. And that was it. You do wonder if they had Byron Scott and if they had Magic, would that have been a much more competitive series or if the Lakers could have won? Who knows? But that's one of the big what ifs in NBA history. The 1990 world champion Detroit Pistons. They were nearly as dominant as the year before, going 59-23 during the regular season and beating the Portland Trailblazers 4 games-1 in the NBA Finals. So, is there anything that you could point at as far as an asterisk for this team? Well, you could point out the Chicago Bulls. Now, most people will tell you that the Portland Trailblazers were a more dominant team on paper, a more talented team on paper than the Chicago Bulls. But Portland was able to defeat them in 5 games, whereas it took them 7 games to beat Chicago. And key in that loss in Game 7 was Scottie Pippen's migraine. Okay, that was the migraine game where Scottie went 1 of 10 from the floor. But to be fair, it wasn't just Scottie. It wasn't just Scottie. Outside of Michael Jordan, who had a very good game, the rest of the Bulls played like trash. Horace Grant, Scottie Pippen, John Paxson, Armstrong coming off the bench, and Bill Cartwright shot a combined 11 for 57 from the floor. The Bulls lost by 19 points, 93-74 at Auburn Hills, but common sense tells you if they didn't shoot that poorly And yes, Detroit's defense had something to do with that, but a lot of that was choking. A lot of that was simply just choking. To shoot 18% from the floor and lose only by 19 in comparison, you missed 46 of 57 shots. That tells me a lot of that is choking. And that Bulls team in 1990 was already good enough to beat Detroit from a talent perspective. They just weren't ready mentally outside of Michael Jordan. The 1991 Chicago Bulls. Love this team. They went 61-21 during the regular season and 15-2 during the postseason. A dominant, dominant team. But they too can get the asterisk treatment. Injuries, injuries, injuries. Okay? To the Cleveland Cavaliers, to the Detroit Pistons, in particular Isaiah Thomas, had to have surgery on his shooting wrist, was never the same player again. The Detroit Pistons were starting to be affected by expansion as far as losing players, decline in overall play with some of their key components. The Boston Celtics. At one point, they were 29-5 during the regular season, the best record in the NBA. Larry Bird goes down with his back issues, and other key players with injuries weren't the same team. And in the NBA Finals, um, they played the Lakers, beat them 4-1, but the Lakers were without James Worthy. It has to be noted that James Worthy, who was right near the ending of the prime of his career, was out due to an injury in that series. The 1992 World Champion Chicago Bulls. Some people will tell you this was the best Bulls team in their dynasty. 67-15 during the regular season. They flirted with the then NBA record 69 win, 72 Lakers. Flirted with the 70 win mark for a bit. Um, what can you critique about this team? Well, for those who are a little bit older, they will know exactly what I mean by this. Magic and Larry. This was the year that was seen as a transition year in the NBA from a league that was dominated by Magic and Larry, and now was seemingly in Jordan's grips. But it wasn't a natural on the court succession. It was due to injuries and tragedy. The Boston Celtics, Larry Bird, his back just continued to deteriorate. His skills continued to diminish. He only played 45 games that year. After that season, he played, sparingly with the Dream Team, then ultimately retired from basketball on August 19th, 1992. After that season, Kevin McHale would retire. Reggie Lewis would tragically die of a heart attack. And the Celtics were going through a serious decline, which they were never really able to get out of for another 15 years. Magic Johnson was still playing phenomenal basketball, was playing great in the preseason in early 91, 92, when he began to feel sick, got a checkup, and found out what we all found out on November 8th of 1991. He had to retire immediately, and the NBA landscape was changed. So you do have to factor that in. If Larry Bird had stayed healthy and the Suns were able to attract some free agents, some lucrative free agents, if Magic Johnson, who was a little bit younger at 32, was able to play longer and would be part of a rebuilding process that wouldn't have taken very long, by the way, would the Bulls have had some more legitimate challenges from Magic and Larry for as far as their dynasty is concerned? This is something that you have to bring up when you talk about the 1992 Chicago Bulls. The 1993 World Champion Chicago Bulls. Now, what can you say about this team? They three-peated, historic championship team, Michael, there's nothing you can say about this team. And aren't you a Chicago Bulls fan? Isn't it blasphemous to say anything about the Bulls? You heathenous bastard, you. Well, I have a reputation for being unbiased, fair, and as much as it pains me to say this, the Bulls got a lot of favorable calls that particular year in the playoffs. I forgot to mention this for the '92 Bulls team. In Game 7 of that semifinal series against the upstart New York Knicks, the refereeing was extraordinarily biased in favor of the Chicago Bulls. As a Bulls fan, I loved it, but it was not fair. But there were a lot of unfair calls that went the Bulls' way in the playoffs. In particular, the series with the New York Knicks. And Michael got a lot of superstar calls in the NBA Finals as well. Also, should be noted that Charles Barkley injured his elbow in Game 2 of the Finals. And even though he still played great, he was kind of hobbled a little bit afterward. It wasn't quite as dominant the last 3 games of the series as he had been the first 3 games. The 1994 World Champion Houston Rockets. Well, the asterisk here can be summed up with just 3 words. No Michael Jordan. The 1995 World Champion Houston Rockets. I have a lot of affinity for this team. The hardest road to a championship I've ever seen. The lowest seeded team ever to win a title. They were the 6th seed. Just an amazing run. But you have to put an asterisk by this team as well. If you're being fair, no Michael Jordan. Yes, he did come back and play 17 games in the regular season. Played in the playoffs, got knocked out by the eventual Eastern Conference champs, Orlando Magic. But he wasn't really Michael Jordan. It wasn't the real version of him. So it kind of got a same treatment to 1914, man. I'm sorry. Kind of same treatment. The 1996 World Champion Chicago Bulls, 72-10, second best record in NBA history. An 87-13 overall record for the season, when you include the playoffs. Best record ever. What can you say about this team? Now, this team legit, Mike. There's nothing that you can say that can put a little asterisk on anything. Yes, you can. Not to say that it would have made a difference, but in the Eastern Conference Finals, they did play a team, Orlando, who were out a key component, Horace Grant. He missed that series. And in the 1996 NBA Finals, you have to wonder how that series may have played out if George Karl didn't wait until fucking Game 4 to put Gary Payton on Michael Jordan. Before that, Jordan was having a really good series. The Bulls were up 3-0. After that, it took until Game 6 for the Chicago Bulls to eliminate the Seattle Supersonics. Also, another thing that you kind of have to put an asterisk on, it was around this time that the NBA was starting to become a bit watered down. Okay, the 2 new franchises, the Toronto Raptors, okay, the then Vancouver Grizzlies came aboard. Some of the players that were being drafted at this time were perennial busts. A lot of the great players of the 80s, early 90s, starting to decline or fall off or retire. You could say that the NBA was becoming a little bit diluted at this time. The 1997 World Champion Chicago Bulls, 69-13, 15-4 during the playoffs, another dominant campaign. What can I say about this team? That's a negative or an asterisk. Well, if people remember this finals, you know what I'm talking about. think it was in Game 6. There was a very, very blatant and obvious goaltending uh, violation committed by Scottie Pippen that was not called. I mean, clearly, he actually hung on the rim, pulled it down, the ball spittooned out. That should have been goaltending, but it was not called. One of the most egregious missed calls in NBA history. As a Bulls fan, of course, I did not care. And of course, the league continued to become even more watered down. The 1998 World Champion Chicago Bulls. All right, despite the fact that Scottie Pippen missed almost half the season recovering from surgery, the Bulls still went 62-20. I think they went something like 15-6 in the postseason. They weren't quite as dominant that particular year as they were in years past, but they were able to win their sixth title of the decade. Truly a dynasty. And there's nothing that I can say about this particular team, this iconic team. Yes, I can. The league continued to deteriorate as far as overall talent. Um, more and more draft picks were misses. You know what I'm saying? I believe that year, wasn't it Michael Olowokandi? I believe it was that year, Joe Smiths, the Trajan Langdons. You just had a lot of these bad draft picks. Um, the stars were retiring, the great players that we would remember. They were becoming shells of themselves. Dominique Wilkins, I think was out the league that particular year, but a lot of these older guys that had carried the league since the 80s were really no longer relevant, you know what I'm saying, for the most part. But in particular, there are two things I want to point out. Game 6 of the 1998 NBA Finals, just playing devil's advocate, and I mentioned this in a video of mine a couple weeks ago. There was a missed three-pointer call. I think it was Howard Eisley. He made a three-pointer at the buzzer, I think it was, or close to the buzzer at halftime that should have counted, that did not. Whereas Ron Harper had a three-pointer that should not have counted, but did count in that game. Remember, the game was only decided by a point, and a lot of people will tell you Michael Jordan pushed off, committed offensive foul. Well, that's up to you. You know what I'm saying? I'm just playing devil's advocate in this video. There's always something with each team that you can bring up that said that helped them along the way. Just saying. The 1999 world champion San Antonio Spurs. So what can you say about this particular team? Okay. Well, first and foremost, it's the first championship in the post-Jordan era. There are a lot of people who feel as if though if the Chicago Bulls had been held together for one more year, they could have beaten the Spurs team pretty easily. Combination of the shortened schedule, the rest, an aging team like the Bulls, the experience, they probably still could have been able to beat this team. Why did a lot of people feel like that? Because their opponent in the finals, the New York Knicks, despite the fact that they lacked the offensive punch, they were a very offensively inconsistent team. Despite that, despite the fact they were out Patrick Ewing, even the older, aged version of Ewing that year, he missed that series because of, I believe, it was Achilles rupture. They still were able to win a game against the Spurs. And, if Sprewell had gotten some consistent help offensively, from a Houston or somebody. Maybe that series could have went a different way. And most of those games were still rather competitive. And it was a lockout year. So a lot of people question the authenticity of this championship. The 2000 world champion Los Angeles Lakers, extremely dominant during the regular season. They went 67-15. Shaq won his lone MVP award. He should have won more. He averaged a career high 29.7 points per game this season. They also had Glenn Rice on this roster. They were a very uh, potent team. So, is there anything that you can put an asterisk by as far as this season? Well, one thing that you can put an asterisk by is that it was at this time that it was obvious that the center position in the NBA was on a severe decline. The great centers of the 80s and 90s were fading away. David Robinson was not the same player that he had been for several years now. Patrick Ewing was near the end of his career, as was Akeem Olajuwon. Um, the great centers were fading. Even Shaq's opponent in the finals, Rick Smits, were playing his last games due to foot injuries. He would soon retire after the NBA Finals at age 33. So the center position was really beginning to diminish in quality. Also, the Lakers were the beneficiary of one of the greatest choke jobs in NBA history when Portland blew a 15-point lead going into the fourth quarter. You could also possibly point to officiating as helping to precipitate that, but I will just say that at the very least, Portland committed one of the biggest choke jobs that we've ever seen in NBA history. Next, you have the 2001 world champion Los Angeles Lakers, going 56-26 during the regular season, but they had an amazing run in the postseason where they only lost one game, that being to the Philadelphia 76ers in the first game of the NBA Finals. This is considered one of the greatest teams in the history of the NBA. Is there anything that you could say to put an asterisk by this team? Well, in addition to my comments about the center position decaying across the league, there was also the obvious observation that the Eastern Conference was comparatively very, very weak by this time when you compare it to the Western Conference. Very, very weak. They played the Philadelphia 76ers, and you have to commend Allen Iverson for being able to take this team to the finals, but pretty much no one thought that that team was going to beat this Lakers team, which makes it very impressive that AI was able to lead them to a victory in game one. There was also the issue with game two that some people have forgotten about, where the Lakers were bailed out by the refs by not calling fouls on AI in game two, which would have evened the series at two apiece after Philly surprisingly won the first game in overtime. Home cooking. The 2002 world champion Los Angeles Lakers. The completion of a three-peat, a great, great dynasty. What can you say about this team? One thing, Game 6, Kings, Lakers, rig job. I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to go further than that one. Okay, anybody that watched that game um, knows what I'm talking about. The 2003 world champion San Antonio Spurs. All right, now this team got rid of the asterisk that a lot of people attached to their first title in '99. This was a legit, authentic title, and nobody, including me, can take that away from them. Actually, yes, I can. They played a 49-win Nets team in the finals. The Eastern Conference was extremely weak at this particular point in time. Nobody gave the Nets a shot. It was actually rather surprising that the Nets won 2 games in the finals. And they were the beneficiary of the two best teams in the Western Conference, at least two of the best teams, the Mavericks and the Kings, who many people saw as legitimate champions due to the shenanigans from last season, battled out in a grueling 7 game series, which was won by the Dallas Mavericks. And then when the Spurs played the Mavericks in the Western Conference Finals, the series was tied at 1-1 when Dirk Nowitzki, and this gets forgotten by a lot of people, Dirk Nowitzki injured his knee in game 3 and did not play the rest of the series. And then conveniently, the Spurs won 3 of the next 4 games. Asterisk? Yep. For world champion Detroit Pistons. This was one of the shocking upsets in the history of the NBA Finals. There's nothing that I can say to put any type of shadow on this title because it was an upset, and you can't put an asterisk on an upset unless you bring up Karl Malone being injured and Shaq not being quite the same because of the surgery that he had, and he just wasn't the same guy. But you can't take away from it. Hey, I'm just saying injuries are a part of the game, but teams do benefit from injuries. Champion San Antonio Spurs. Now this Spurs team. Now look, this one is legit. There's no asterisk attached to this one. I promise you, this is a different team than all the others I've mentioned. There's nothing you can say other than the fact that they benefited from the implosion of the Kobe Shaq dynasty. Okay, so there's an asterisk. They did benefit from that team breaking up, but there's nothing else I can say other than that in the finals, especially in that pivotal game 7, that there's nothing else I can say other than Rasheed Wallace missing his defensive assignment, which was Robert Horry, which led to them blowing that finals. Hey, but there's nothing else I can say about this tremendously great team. The 2006 world champion Miami Heat, their first championship in their franchise history. This was Shaq's fourth and final title, Dwayne Wade's first. And he had a Jordan-esque performance in the finals, which will always be remembered as truly legitimate. And he also had an unlimited access to the foul line in that series. It was disgraceful to anybody who wasn't rooting for Miami. I mean, just absolutely atrocious what the league was doing in that series. It made you wonder whether Dirk fucked the commissioner's daughter without consent. I don't know what was going on. He shot 25 free throws in game 5 alone. The 2007 world champion San Antonio Spurs. It was their fourth championship. And this one has to be the one. This is the one that I cannot put an asterisk by in any way. Nothing I could think of other than that when they played the Suns in the playoffs, the Suns were without Boris Diaw and Amar'e Stoudemire, both being suspended for bullshit reasons. Not to mention the fact that this is the third time in their 4 championships that they played a weak ass opponent in the Cleveland Cavaliers. Yes, LeBron had that tremendous run, but did anybody really think that the Cavs were going to beat this Spurs team, which was arguably the best Spurs team of the dynasty? Did anybody really think that? Another asterisk. Anything is possible. The 2008 world champion Boston Celtics, 66-16 during the regular season. Dominant team. Brought the Celtics back to glory. What can I say about this team? Other than that they were Celtic pride. Other than that they brought back the tradition of Bird, Cousy, Russell, and that, for some reason they had trouble with the Atlanta Hawks in the first round, a team they should have swept. And then they went 7 games, of course, with LeBron and the Cavs, which, by the way, in game 7, they benefited from the refs in beating this team, a team that nearly upsetted the 66 win team. And then in the finals, they had to come back multiple times from heavy double digit deficits, which was predicated more on their defense, which goes to show you who was really the best coach on that staff. It was Tom Thibodeau, not Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers constantly got in his own way, and the greatness of this team, talent wise, just superseded Doc Rivers' ineptitude at times at making adjustments. By the way, this was also a super team that has to be mentioned. Uh, you know, and they did benefit from the Lakers not having Andrew Bynum available for the finals. Asterisk. The 2009 world champion Los Angeles Lakers. Kobe was able to overcome the departure of Shaquille O'Neal some 5 years earlier and bring the Lakers franchise back to the top of the NBA. A dominant campaign. They went 65-17 during the regular season. Great, great team. Kobe, just he was just back at the top of the NBA. And there's nothing you can say other than that they had a really easy time at the finals playing a team that shouldn't have even been there. If it wasn't for the injury to Kevin Garnett, we would have had a much more competitive series in the finals because Boston would have made it to the finals and maybe would have had a different outcome. The 2010 world champion Los Angeles Lakers repeated, of course, from the year prior. Kobe Bryant individually wins his 5th NBA championship. And even though this discussion, this debate, is somehow forgotten in the annals of history, this 5th title precipitated the fiery debate at the time: who was the GOAT, Jordan or Kobe? Very, very, very uh, important championship in the history of the Lakers franchise. There's nothing I could say, I think, that would taint it in any way, other than the fact that in Game 7 of that series, the Boston Celtics were without Kendrick Perkins. Yes, Kendrick Perkins, we call him a bum, but as in a series that close, any major injury will play a factor, and his absence did play a factor. They missed him in that game. And also, it has to be noted that in Game 7 in the fourth quarter, the Lakers shot an amazing 14 free throws. 14 free throws in a 4-point victory. The 2011 world champion Dallas Mavericks. This is the championship that solidified Dirk Nowitzki as one of the all-time great players. They had a magnificent run. They swept the defending Lakers in the playoffs, and Dirk didn't play with another superstar, and they upsetted the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals. There's just nothing I can say that could put a dent on this championship. There's nothing I can say, such as, you know, the team with the best record, the Chicago Bulls, 60 wins. Unfortunately, their best player, Derrick Rose, suffered that ACL injury, which took them completely out of contention for title, contention. And Derrick Rose never became the same player after that. Could also mention, of course, that uh, in the playoffs, the Spurs didn't have Mount Ginobili, lost him to injury. But hey, other than that, there's nothing I can say. The 2012 world champion Miami Heat. Well, what can you say about this super team? They were a super team. enough said. Also, it was a lockout year, so those championships almost always have an asterisk, not a full 82 game schedule, asterisk. The 2013 world champion Miami Heat. Well, as I said prior to this, they were a super team. By this time, the Eastern Conference was a virtual cakewalk for the Miami Heat. It was even weaker, in my opinion, than it was 10 years before this. And during the series, the Spurs missed a series of easy free throws. And as has been repeated time and time again, LeBron James's legacy was saved by Ray Allen hitting the biggest shot of his NBA career in Game 6. Also in this series, Manu Ginobili inexplicably forgot which team he was on and kept passing to the wrong team. But hey, other than that, legit. The 2014 world champion San Antonio Spurs, right? Now, this was near the end of Tim Duncan's legendary career, winning his fifth title. And I think this championship cemented the Spurs as a dynasty. Not the greatest dynasty, never won back to back, but to win five titles in a span of 15 years or so, I think that means something. So, congratulations to the Spurs still on this championship some years ago. Is there anything you can say about this team other than that they were very fortunate that the air conditioning conked out in game one of that series, which led to LeBron James having to be carried away cramping and having to deal with cramps for much of the series. But that didn't have an effect on the series. Yeah, right. The 2015 world champion Golden State Warriors, the beginning of the dynasty. Now, what can you say about this team that hasn't been said before? At the time, a franchise record 67 regular season victories, a dominant team, the Splash Brothers, and a new era in basketball commenced, which was benefited by favorable playoff matchups uh, and also injuries. Let's not forget that this team benefited from injuries from guys like Drew Holiday, who we just saw have a great run with the Milwaukee Bucks. They also benefited from injuries to guys like Michael Conley. And, also they benefit from injuries to Patrick Beverly in each subsequent series. And of course, in the finals, they didn't have to contend with Kevin Love at all. And then soon thereafterwards, they didn't have to contend with Kyrie Irving. But other than that, legitimate. The 2016 world champion Cleveland Cavaliers. A dramatic comeback in the finals, 3 games to 1. When everybody thought this team was down, this YouTuber right here thought this team had the goods to come back and win in 7, which they did. They were the first team to come back from 3 games to 1 in the finals. They're the first team in 50 something years in the city of Cleveland to win, 52 years, I believe, to win a championship. And they're the first team to benefit from a Game 5 suspension from Draymond Green in the finals. Yes, they did. Look, yes, I don't think Draymond's a Hall of Famer. But if you look back at it, Draymond Green was playing the best basketball of his career at that time, that season. Matter of fact, when he came back in Game 7, Draymond dropped, what, 35, 37? When do you think he's going to do that again? Never. So his suspension in Game 5 was big. And also what gets forgotten is the injury to Andrew Bogut. They really, truly missed the Warriors' Andrew Bogut in those last 2 games of that series. The 2017 world champion Golden State Warriors. Super team. Kevin Durant acquired on an already great team, championship level team, made them nearly unbeatable. By this time, the league was lacking parity with only two real teams with legitimate shot at winning a title. Also, the Warriors benefited from an injury to Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard infamously or famously had his team up 23 points on the road when that goofball injured him and ended his San Antonio Spurs career unintentionally. The 2018 World Champion, Golden State Warriors. So where do I start here? Super team uh, still was benefiting from the lack of parity in the NBA at that time. Uh, Benefited from the injury to Chris Paul that had him miss the last two games of the Western Conference Finals. At the time, they were down 3-2. Benefited from that. Also benefited from a absolutely historic meltdown by the Rockets in Game 7 where they missed 27 three-point attempts in a row. Mike D'Antoni just refusing, hey, let's try something different. No, no. You would think after the 15th consecutive miss, they would try something different, but no, they did not. And ultimately, they played a Cavaliers team that had just been through a grueling 7-game series against the Celtics. And that Cavaliers team was without Kyrie Irving. The 2019 World Champion Toronto Raptors. This championship helped to cement Kawhi Leonard as an all-time great, and it also was the first NBA championship outside of the United States. But it's a championship that has an asterisk in a lot of people's eyes due to the Golden State Warriors having suffered a lot of significant injuries, most notably Kevin Durant, who was already hobbled with a lower leg injury, which debilitated into an Achilles rupture right before our eyes when he briefly made a return to finals. And then Klay Thompson later tore his ACL. And also, what gets forgotten is that DeMarcus Cousins, who had been hobbled with injuries, came back and made an effort, but also re-injured himself. So, asterisk, the 2020 World Champion, Los Angeles Lakers. LeBron James, after a stutter step the first year, made good on his promise to make the Lakers a champion franchise again. Celebrations were heard nationwide in Lakerland and across the nation. LeBron is that guy. He is amongst the greatest players of all time. But it's also true that this championship has an asterisk by it because it was in the bubble. It was in the bubble. No crowds in the bubble, no traveling, no pressure. I mean, it's just not the same. Then even in the finals, they played a team that they should have swept that had injuries, Goran Dragic and others, and they still were able to win 2 games against the Lakers. I'm sorry, you got to put an asterisk by it. And this brings me finally to our most recent champion, the 2021 World Champion Milwaukee Bucks. Hey, this team did it the right way. They didn't, pile the plate as far as talent is concerned. No super team building. They did it organically. They did it the right way. And this is why people like me were rooting for this team, because, hey, no super teams here. You know, all the haters had to bow down. This team didn't benefit from anything. They didn't benefit from, Kyrie Irving being hurt. They didn't benefit from James Harden being hurt just 11 seconds into the series. No, they didn't benefit from that. They didn't benefit from Joe Harris apparently having his power stolen by the Monstars yet again, just in time for the sequel to, Space Jam. No, they didn't benefit from that. They didn't benefit from the Suns inexplicably playing Giannis single coverage and Monty Williams forgetting how to strategize and coach, and the Suns being a pretender to the throne because they also benefit from injuries in the Western Conference? No, the Bucks didn't benefit. Yes, of course they did. They did. I like the Bucks, but God damn it, the fact remains they did benefit. They benefited and there's an asterisk attached to them. But the point of this video, if you watch this entire 1 hour and 20 something minute video, the point is that every team from the inception of the NBA back when it was the BAA and the NBL back in the 40s until today's basketball, there's something you could point out, an injury there, bad officiating. Even one particular year, mafia interference. There's something that you could point to that will put an asterisk by every single championship. So to point out the Milwaukee Bucks is despicable and reprehensible. Every damn team benefited from something. It takes talent, it takes experience, it takes all these positive things like to talk about. But there's one other indicator that also we can't control, and that's fate. And sometimes I guess you could look at it as luck. Injuries are part of the game. And for all of these crying ass net fans that just won't let this shit go, as I said before in the video, don't forget that your team benefited from injuries to the Boston Celtics. So that's all I got to say. Tell me what you guys think. Shout out to Yosef once again for letting me use his resource in making this video. I add a little bit of my own personal knowledge in some of these accounts, but shout out to him. He did the heavy lifting as far as the research is concerned. And shout out to him, and I thank him once again for allowing me to use his research for this video. But tell me what you guys think, and don't be fanboys, okay? Don't sit there and look. I think what you said about the Warriors was out of line. I talked about every damn team, okay? There's no bias shown here. I talked about every damn team, including the Chicago Bulls. So tell me what you guys think.